Geoffrey Chaucer. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Dusty old books, a language that's kind of hard to read. But the man himself? Oh, he lived through a world that was absolutely on fire. We're talking pandemics, social rebellion, radical new ideas, the whole shebang. Yeah, he's called the father of English poetry, but that doesn't even begin to cover it. He was a witness, a survivor, and a storyteller who didn't just write about his world, he literally helped build the language we use to talk about our own. So let's dive in and see how he did it.
To really get a handle on Chaucer's genius, we're going to take a little journey through his life and times. First, we'll look at the absolutely turbulent 14th century he was born into. Then, we'll get to know the man himself, a diplomat, soldier, and poet. After that, we'll see how he held up a mirror to his society in his masterpiece, the Canterbury Tales. And then, this is the big one, we'll uncover his role in forging the English language. And finally, we'll see why all this makes him, you could argue, the first truly modern poet. All right, so before we can really understand the poet, we have to understand his world. And let me tell you, the 14th century was not some quiet, peaceful, medieval fairy tale. It was a time of violent, massive change, where the old world was seriously starting to crack at the seams. Historians use words like ferment and unrest to describe this time, and that's key. This wasn't a society that was just sitting still. It was bubbling. It was seething with new ideas, new fights, and forces that were challenging hundreds of years of tradition. And right at the heart of all this chaos was the Black Death. I mean, just try to wrap your head around a plague so bad that it kills at least 1 out of every 3 people you know. It was an unbelievable catastrophe. But it had this shocking side effect. It completely turned the social order upside down. Suddenly, with so many workers gone, peasants actually had some power. They could demand better wages, and that old feudal system, it started to fall apart. And if that wasn't enough, you've got a war with France that just seems to go on forever, the 100 Years' War, which meant insane taxes for everybody. This whole pressure cooker of plague, war, and poverty finally just exploded in 1381. The Peasants' Revolt had rebels literally storming the gates of London, demanding freedom. This was the wild, transformative world that made Geoffrey Chaucer. So who was this guy watching all this chaos unfold? Well, Chaucer wasn't some monk tucked away in a monastery or a lord chilling in a castle. No, he was something way more interesting. He was a man right in the thick of it all. I mean, just look at this resume. This was not a guy who was detached from the real world. As a wine merchant's son, he got the hustle of the growing middle class. As a page and a diplomat, he was deep in the politics of the royal court. He was even a soldier and a prisoner of war. And get this. As the guy in charge of customs for London, he would have seen and talked to people from every single walk of life, every single day. His life was basically an all-access pass to the entire 14th century. So, here's the crucial takeaway. His incredibly busy career wasn't separate from his poetry. It was the fuel for it. This one-of-a-kind perspective is exactly what let him create his masterpiece. And that masterpiece is, of course, the Canterbury Tales. And the whole idea behind it is just pure genius. A bunch of different people from all the social classes go on a trip to Canterbury, and they tell stories to each other to pass the time. It was the perfect setup for Chaucer to hold a giant mirror up to his entire society. Now, to really appreciate what he's doing, you have to know the social rules of the time. Medieval society was supposed to be neatly split into these 3 groups, or estates: the clergy, who prayed, the nobles who fought, and the common people who worked. Chaucer takes this official structure and basically uses it as a stage to show both the ideal and the messy, corrupt, real way things actually were. Let me show you how he does it. Let's look at the church. On one hand, you've got the parson. He's the ideal priest, poor but incredibly devout. Then, on the other hand, you have the friar, a guy who's totally corrupt and uses religion to make money and have a good time. By putting these 2 characters right next to each other, Chaucer totally exposes the hypocrisy without ever having to preach about it himself. It's so clever and so powerful. And he does the exact same thing with the nobility, which really captures how the times were changing. You have the knight, who is this perfect example of old-school chivalry, a veteran of the Crusades. And then you have his son, the squire, who's the new model. He's fashionable, he writes poetry, and he's way more interested in impressing a girl than fighting a holy war. In just one father-son duo, Chaucer shows us the medieval world starting to turn into the modern one. But Chaucer didn't just play around with the established social roles. He created characters who just completely shattered the mold. And none did it more than one of the most famous and unforgettable women in all of English literature. Oh, the wife of Bath. She is an absolute force of nature. She's a business owner, she's traveled the world, and she's been married 5 times. In her story's introduction, she just brilliantly argues for female agency and desire in a world that was totally built for men. She's funny, she's bold, she's complicated, and she's so incredibly revolutionary. Seriously, she feels like a character who could have been written yesterday. But as groundbreaking as his characters were, Chaucer's most important legacy might be something we all use every single day without even thinking about it: the English language itself. You see, when Chaucer was born, there was a pretty clear language divide. All the powerful people, the king, the nobles, the top church officials, they all spoke French. Any serious writing, like for law or scholarship, was done in Latin. And English? Well, English was the language of the common folk, and it was seen as kind of crude and unsophisticated. But then, this kind of perfect storm happened that changed everything. First, the war with France made speaking French feel, well, pretty unpatriotic. Second, the Black Death killed off a huge number of the clergy who spoke and taught Latin. But the final knockout blow came from Chaucer himself. He made a bold, conscious decision to write his greatest work not in the fancy language of the court, but in the everyday English of the people. I think this quote from the scholar John Livingston Lowes just nails it. By writing the Canterbury Tales in English, Chaucer proved it could be a language for great art. He made it legitimate, he made it richer, and he basically standardized it, paving the way for the language of Shakespeare and, well, for us. So when you put it all together, his sharp insights into a changing world, his creation of these incredibly real characters, and his championing of the English language, you start to see why he's such a massive figure in history. So why does he still matter today? Well, because he's at the beginning of so many things we take for granted. He's the father of English poetry, for sure. He's called the morning star of the Renaissance because he brought back this new focus on individual human experience from his trips to Italy. His realism was a total game changer. In fact, his talent for telling stories about complex people was so ahead of its time, a lot of people see his work as the direct ancestor of the modern novel. Which brings up a pretty wild question. When you look at his intricate plots, his deep dives into his characters' psychology, and his focus on social reality, you kind of have to wonder, was he actually writing poetry, or was he inventing the novel about 250 years too early? And hey, that's not just some modern idea. Listen to this. One scholar made the case that Chaucer's long poem, Troilus and Cresside, has all the key ingredients of a modern novel. The only thing that really separates it from the great novels of the 18th century is that it's written in verse. Pretty amazing, right? So at the end of the day, Chaucer's contribution was huge, and it was twofold. He took a common dialect and turned it into a powerful language for literature. And then, with that language, he created a masterpiece that, for the very first time, showed the English people what they really looked like, in all their flawed, funny, and wonderful humanity. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. Chaucer captured his own chaotic era by using a whole cast of different voices in a language he helped make great. So it makes you wonder, who are the Chaucers of our time? Who are the storytellers using new platforms, new slang, new forms of media to hold that mirror up to our own complicated and fast-changing world?